After a week of love taps and trifles, the reality in the Persian Gulf is becoming much more serious. Despite a month-old ceasefire, US and Iranian forces are trading fire. On Thursday night, a US Navy attack on an Iranian commercial ship left one crew member dead and six missing. Iran has retaliated with strikes on the United Arab Emirates. And the US military is now hitting smokestacks on vessels trying to run the blockade. But a new CIA assessment has just leaked, and it carries a sobering message for the White House. Iran can likely withstand this naval blockade for at least another 4 months. This raises a massive question about President Trump's leverage as he prepares to meet with President Xi Jinping in China. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the president's trade war has hit a major legal wall. For the fifth time, a court has struck down his attempt to unilaterally raise taxes on imports. I'm Mona Mosalhi, and this is In Focus. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in Rome, frustrated that allies like Italy aren't backing the blockade. He warns that letting Tehran control the Strait of Hormuz sets a dangerous precedent. However, the new intelligence report suggests that the economic pressure Trump is counting on won't peak until late summer. Right, to help us understand the legal crisis in the court and the strategic crisis in the Gulf, we are joined by Ms. Ginger Chapman. Good morning, Ms. Ginger, and welcome to our episode. Now, if the CIA believes Iran can hold out for another 4 months, does that effectively ruin the president's sign it fast strategy? And how does that intelligence change the negotiation dynamics in Pakistan?
Well, thank you for having me today, Ms. Mona, and greetings to your viewers. And the significance of the CIA leaked report to the Washington Post goes far beyond and is greater than just the revelations that Iran can hold out for 4 to 5 months, that Iran's missile defenses are not as degraded as President Trump is saying. And it's because this signifies that the CIA is now working against Trump. The reason this report was leaked by the CIA is to undermine President Trump's public statements, which is evidence of the deepening rift in Washington over the war in Iran. And as far as the details of the report, this must be very alarming to the White House to hear that essentially all of the White House narratives that they are using to sell the war to the American people, to calm the oil futures markets, that these are not based on reality, and the facts that the CIA is presenting is that the United States is in a weaker position than being presented, that we have not degraded Iran's missile defenses, and that indeed we are not winning the war. Now, this bodes this is a double-edged sword. On one hand, the American people and the White House needs to be able to work with facts on the ground, with the truth of the situation. On the other hand, this will make America and Israel increasingly desperate. And we see this by the recent actions happening in the Gulf. America is trying to send destroyers through the strait. Iran is firing on the destroyers. The United States is firing on Iranian cargo ships. Iran is seizing commercial vessels of other nations that are defying their control of the strait. So the combination of the naval blockade, the CIA leaked revelations, and military action in the strait is pointing towards increasing escalation. We know that President Trump wants a victory. He wants a grand military victory.
Mhm.
Trump does not have the patience or the personality to engage in the long-term negotiations needed to reach some type of deal such as was reached with the JCPOA. And indeed, we see that Trump's negotiating position is now that he wants no nuclear weapons in Iran and he wants the Strait of Hormuz open. These are the conditions that prevailed before the war started. So what this means is that we are negotiating to get back to square one. And indeed, Trump's other objectives, the enriched uranium, the ballistic missiles, support for proxies, those demands have now been put on the back burner. And more significantly, Iran is now in a greater position of strength, and they are not backing down on their demands for sanctions relief.
Mhm.
And the background on sanctions relief, Iran abided by the JCPOA for years, and the United States never complied with giving them the sanctions relief that was the other side of the bargain. So
Mhm.
now it looks like Iran is going to hold on to the strait, the tolls, and demand their sanctions relief.
But now Iran has already stepped up its attacks, and this time on the United Arab Emirates. Now, especially that week. Now, of course, that came in response to Project Freedom. Is this a legal signaling move by Tehran to show that hosting US bases now comes with a permanent cost to Gulf security? What do you think?
Yes, it is. Tehran has been trying to make this point that the American bases have not only failed to protect America's Gulf allies, but the bases themselves became a magnet for missile strikes and attacks from Iran. And Iran's recent insistence on uh, pointing out the American military bases, wanting the American bases out of the region, a reduced American footprint, they are in a stronger position now because we see that China and Russia have been more openly supporting Iran and openly using the phrase security architecture for the region. We heard Putin say this, and then we just heard Xi say this, as Aragchi has visited both Russia and China. So it appears this new term, a new security architecture for the Middle East region, is going to be a guiding principle for the Iranian side. And at the same time, we see the fractures and divisions among America and America's allies are growing deeper. The first sign was the UAE leaving OPEC, aligning more closely with the United States, receiving more defense weapons. The UAE took a terrible beating from Iran. More than half of Iran's missiles were directed at the UAE. So Iran reserved a special punishment for the Emirates. And now this is being extended and fracturing the other allies. We see that Saudi Arabia is now speaking more openly with China. They have greater economic relations with China. Saudi Arabia just announced an investment in a new Chinese um, investment house. So the geopolitical and the geoeconomic alliances in the Middle East are going to be changing very rapidly. America is not in the position of strength we thought that we were,
Mm,
and Iran is now, they have been laying the groundwork for decades, and now Iran is in a far greater position of strength than they appeared before this war, which is why we also see Trump, Secretary of State Rubio, they are now scrambling in front of the press to spin a narrative of victory for the ongoing operations in the Persian Gulf, the
mhm,
Gulf of Oman, and the Strait of Hormuz.
mhm. The reported U.S. attacks on an Iranian commercial ship, this that has resulted in deaths and missing sailors. Now, under the international maritime law, what is the legal justification for lethal force against a non-military vessel and during a tenuous ceasefire?
Well, attacks and targeted operations against civilian infrastructure, against commercial ships, this is a war crime. There's no evidence these ships were carrying any type of contraband. So this is a war crime because under the Geneva Conventions, additional protocols, under the United Nations Convention of the Sea, attacks on civilians are war crimes. And this is because civilians not only cannot defend themselves against military attacks, but um, other civilians are relying on goods, food, supplies so that they can survive war and military operations. Additionally, attacks on ships are especially sensitive because essentially it's not like attacking a land vehicle where people can survive on land. Being adrift at sea is a death sentence for civilians. Indeed, having missing people that may have been blown off of these vessels by concussive waves, um, damage, killing of civilians. These are war crimes, and what is most alarming about these crimes is that we see America engaging in war crimes without thinking ahead to future consequences, future international criminal court consequences. So right now, the rumors coming out of this region are running rampant. We hear about civilian deaths on commercial cargo ships. We hear that American sailors are missing from the destroyers that came under Iranian attack. So the fog of war is getting thicker.
Mhm.
We do not, essentially, the rumors are coming out of this region. Also, one other region with respect to some of the missile strikes from Iran, many people are expecting a false flag attack from Israel at any moment in order to bring America deeper into this war. So, rumors of war, false flags, the information and lack of information coming out of the theater right now is creating more chaos and uncertainty.
Um, the Treasury just sanctioned 10 entities in China. We're speaking now, we're moving to China, where there is much anticipated upcoming visit from President Trump to China. And China is, in a way or another, involved in this war. Now, just as we said, that the U.S. has just sanctioned 10 entities in China and Hong Kong for aiding Iran's drone program. Now, with Trump heading to China, is this maximum pressure or is it a risky provocation before a high-stakes summit?
These economic sanctions are risky, and they're part of Trump's bold strike before the negotiations begin strategy. However, we know that Trump has been engaged in an economic trade and sanctions war with China since the beginning of his second term. And indeed, just over the past week, Trump sanctioned the Chinese refineries for accepting Iranian oil. Then China began enforcing their newly passed law blocking American sanctions as being an illegal interference with their internal or their trade arrangements. And indeed, trade arrangements between two other countries. Where does the United States have the jurisdiction or authority to sanction? However, Trump is not backing down. China did tell these refineries to ignore the American sanctions, and then less than 48 hours later, Xi reversed the blocking of the American sanctions on the refineries, and now Trump has announced more sanctions on more Chinese companies. So Trump is not laying the groundwork for peaceful negotiations when he arrives in China. And indeed, many Americans wondered if Trump would strike Iran before his trip to China and if that would prevent Xi from receiving Trump. So it appears that Trump does not want to militarily strike Iran because of the effect it would have on his upcoming visit with Xi. But at the same time, Trump is engaging in aggressive economic warfare against China. So what is Trump's strategy? We know that not just China, but also some of the Gulf nations are now selling American treasuries. They need the money to buy gold, to hedge their bets. Also, these countries have no income coming in because of the war. So Gulf countries, Asian countries are now selling American treasuries, and the economic warfare is heating up before Trump's visit to China. And we know that Trump is somewhat envious of China and their recent military prowess. We know Trump was jealous of China after China's big military parade at the beginning of Trump's term.
And that brings me to ask you about the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who was asking why allies aren't helping. Now, from your own perspective, why there is a lack of international support? Is it based on disagreement over the war, disagreement of its legality, disagreement of what it brings on the allies? What do you think?
As well, one initial reason is Trump's his tactic of carrying out these bold moves and then announcing them and then asking for help. A great example is when the Straits of Hormuz closed and Trump said, we need our NATO allies to open the strait. And our NATO allies said, this is a very dangerous proposition. We do not know what your intentions are. You did not even consult with us before you started this war. They refused to help. Trump became angry. He said, this was a loyalty test. You all failed. We didn't need your help. We want to kick Spain and Italy out of NATO. Now he's dividing NATO countries up into good countries we like, bad countries we want to punish. Also with the naval blockade and with Operation or Project Freedom. Trump announced Project Freedom and then demanded the use of Gulf allies' airspace, at which point Saudi Arabia said, you cannot use our airspace. This brought that operation to a halt. Now it's restarted Project Freedom. So essentially, Trump is all over the place. He is making announcements. He is not coordinating with any of our allies. Rather, he is demanding compliance, use of the British base in Cyprus, in Diego Garcia. So Trump is making it very difficult for allies to coordinate with American actions. Plus, much of the world, the European allies believed that this was an ill-fated venture, beginning a war with Iran. The EU is keeping an eye out for how they could use this war with Iran to weaken their rival Russia. But at this time, Trump's handling of this war against Iran has only brought about economic hardship for our European allies, our Asian allies, as well as our adversaries at a time that Europe is already overextended financially with the war with Russia, and European countries are going through energy poverty right now. We see this with Germany. Somehow, after the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was mysteriously blown up, Germany and Europe have had an energy shortage, and this war with Iran is only making it worse for Europe, for the rest of the world, as well as for America domestically.
Right. Ms. Ginger, while this war in the Gulf continues, in the Persian Gulf continues, and while the Navy is enforcing a blockade in the Gulf indoors, the Court of International Trade is blocking the president's power to tax at home. So let's just first have a look at the latest judicial defeat for the administration. Late Thursday, the U.S. Court of International Trade struck down a 10% global tariff. This is Trump's fifth straight loss in court regarding his trade war. The administration tried to use Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act, a law meant to deal with gold reserves in the 1970s, to justify new taxes today. The court was not convinced. Right, back to you, Ms. Chapman. And the administration argued that balance of payments is a flexible term that covers general economic malaise. Now, why did the court find this argument so brittle and unacceptable?
Well, one of the things we see the Trump administration doing, which is what he accused the Obama administration of doing, is the Trump lawyers are trying to find any type of statutes that will allow them to carry out their goals of imposing economic sanctions, imposing their own unilateral trade arrangements without the consent of Congress, and indeed imposing them on other countries without negotiation. And on top of this, Trump is also destroying the old world order of trading blocks, of international trade agreements that have been in place for decades. So there is a great deal of resistance, but also Trump's strategy of going around the law to engage in unilateral action. So the Court of International Trade, however, is interesting because, as you noted, Ms. Mona, this is the fifth time they've struck down Trump's unilateral trade actions. Trump has also gone to the Supreme Court in the United States, which has upheld some of his trade sanctions and tariffs, and at the same time have restricted his ability to use certain laws. And this has also angered Congress. However, our Congress has delegated themselves out of the picture, leaving the president with more authority than he would normally have under the Constitution. So we see the International Court is reining in Trump's use of inappropriate laws to carry out his unilateral trade and tariff impositions, and they are signaling to Trump he needs to go to Congress. If he wants to impose tariffs, he needs to go through the proper channels. He needs to go through Congress. He needs to go through international mechanisms and negotiations with other countries rather than bullying and intimidation and ultimatums. However, we know that Trump
that makes me ask you, Ms. Ginger, as a lawyer, how do you view the loss of the American administration for the fifth time here on core policy issues? And does this suggest that the legal team uh, um, um, is being reckless, or is the president simply demanding they argue the impossible? Uh, how do you perceive five-time losses?
Yes. Well, as you said, the Trump White House itself might be reckless. And what we see from Trump's cabinet and his advisors, particularly Pete Hegseth, is a great example of this. Trump's cabinet is supposed to be wise, prudent counselors that advise the president of costs, benefits, risks, and long-term projections, how this would work out for the good of the United States as well as the international community and our relations with other countries. Instead, his cabinet is cheerleading. They're not offering wise counsel. They are cheerleading his ideas and then trying to determine how they can carry them out. A great example is the use of the emergency import laws to try to impose tariffs on other countries, and then successive use of Section 301 and 221 as Trump works his way through the federal code, trying to use any law and see what sticks. So this speaks not just to a lack of strategy, but also a lack of wise and prudent counsel, and trying to make the law
Mm.
bend to the president's demands rather than saying, what here is that Trump is pushing through not just tariffs, but also American domestic laws and policies by force of his personality. And this does not leave a foundation or a legacy for the next president.
Mm.
So Trump is amassing more power under the executive branch by using executive orders and unilateral actions, and sometimes just ignoring the law or misapplying the law. And this is creating a risk for future Republican presidents. Um, One, to be able to continue Trump's policies when they do not have the cult following or the force of personality that Trump does. And so he's making it more difficult for future Republican presidents. And at the same time, he is garnering more power under the executive branch than it is supposed to have. And when there is a Democrat president in office, they can use this oversized executive branch power to then carry out actions that are damaging to the Republicans as well as to the country. So the other big risk is uh,
Yes.
the erosion of checks and balances between our three branches of government.
All right. I'm running out of time, but I really need to ask you two important questions, and I'll just uh, put them together. Now, the court mentioned a constitutional question regarding the present unilateral raising taxes. Is the judiciary finally drawing a hard line to stop the executive branch from taking over Congress' power to tax? And also, if I may ask you here, that the rulings touch on fundamental question, which is the president as a leader. Is he a leader with limited powers, or can he act like a monarch in times of emergency? And how does this ruling impact this authority to conduct the war in Iran?
Well, the power to tax is one of the most important powers of the government, which is why the United States Constitution vested it in the House of Representatives, who are the closest to the people, and they can be voted out and suffer the consequences most quickly under our American system of government. The president is trying to take this power for himself, both domestically in the form of economic policy and also internationally, not for the benefit of America, but as a cudgel, as a punishment, as a way to either bully or coerce countries, as well as for a reward, as opposed to a sane economic foundation for America's prosperity and for fair trade with other countries. So the courts have a fine legal line to walk between
Mhm.
acknowledging the president's power and the
Yes.
division of and also to get to your other question about Trump acting as a monarch.
Hmm.
Uh, Trump is acting as an imperial president. He appears to be trying to save the American empire, but what he is
Yes.
doing is sacrificing the American republic to save the
Yes.
empire. The American people want the American republic to survive. The
Yes.
American empire is in
Very,
decline.
very clear, Ms. Ginger. However, my time is out here, and I have to thank you so much for the legal breakdown. It's a busy time to be a constitutional scholar, definitely. Thank you so much for your time. Now, for months, that is the window the CIA says Iran has before the blockade really hurts. But in Washington, the window for the president's tariffs is even shorter, closing in July as the courts continue to say no. The administration is finding that power, whether in the Strait of Hormuz or the Court of International Trade, is not absolute. You can hit a ship's smokestack with a fighter jet, and you can sign a proclamation for new taxes, but if the world doesn't follow and the law doesn't hold, you aren't leading, you're just fighting. This has been In Focus. Many thanks for watching.